Distinguished Lecture Series. And before we get started, if you would please make sure to silence all of your telecommunication devices so that they don't interfere with the electrical signal and cause the sprinkler system to start getting us wet. Threats always work out. I'm also going to ask that you hold questions until the end, unless Dr. Kleinig overrides my request and invites you to interrupt him with questions. And also to remind all of the graduate students that immediately following the formal lecture, there is going to be an informal colloquium with Dr. Kleinig in the Bates room, followed by lunch in CJ's cafeteria. And make certain if you go to the lunch, whether you're a graduate student or not, sneak in, get a free lunch, sign the little lunch sheet, and you don't get charged for your meal. And so you're all welcome to join us at lunch around noon. My formal role is to welcome everyone here on behalf of the College of Criminal Justice, the students, the faculty, the dean, and all of the sub-deans that we've now created. We are thrilled to have you here, and we're thrilled to have our distinguished lecturer, Dr. John Kleinig, with us. Dr. Kleinig is a professor in the Department of Law and Police Science at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice and at the Center for Applied Philosophy and Public Ethics at the John Sturt University, which is part of the Australian National University System. Yes, in Australia. This is the second Beto Chair lecture being presented this academic year, and it will be followed in the spring by a visit from Dr. Cassia Spahn from Arizona State University and Dr. William Chambliss from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. The specific dates for those presentations have not yet been set, but you will be advised and notified when they are and encouraged to attend. A brief introduction of the lecture series itself. This is part of the Beto Chair Lecture Series, which originated in 1981 when the university received an endowment from the Jesse H. Jones and Mary Gibbs Jones Endowment, which is also known as the Houston Endowment Corporation. The purpose of the gift was to help enrich the educational experiences of the College of Criminal Justice's doctoral students by bringing leading figures in our discipline to campus. And it was named in honor of Dr. George J. Beto, former director of the Texas Department of Corrections and a distinguished professor of criminal justice here at Sam Houston State University from 1972 until his retirement in 1992. Since its inception, the Distinguished Lecture Series has enjoyed presentations by leading academic researchers and scholars, including Leslie Wilkins, Richard Quinney, Rita Simon, Norval Morris, and James Short. Today, we are proud to add John Kleinig's name to that list. Dr. Kleinig received his undergraduate and master's degrees from the University of Western Australia and his PhD degree from the Australian National University. He was also awarded a bachelor's in divinity from Melbourne College of Divinity, which he took while he was studying for his PhD. He is a fellow in the Philosophy of Education Society, as well as the International Institute for Public Ethics, and his vita lists membership in numerous learned societies, including the American Society for Political and Legal Philosophy, the Society for Philosophy and Public Affairs, the American Philosophical Association, and the Association for Practical and Professional Ethics. Professor Kleinig has served on the editorial boards of 16 major journals and also serves as the National Vice President of the Edward Sagarin Institute for the Study of Deviance and Social Issues, as well as being the Director of the Institute for Criminal Justice Ethics. And this backdrop is part of that institute. And you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the journal Criminal Justice Ethics, which Dr. Kleinig edits. It has edited since '86 or somewhere thereabout. Dr. Kleinig began his teaching career as a tutor in philosophy at the University of Western Australia and has served on the faculty of numerous other programs, including guest or visiting professorships at the London School of Education, the University of Sydney, the University of Arizona, Princeton, and also Harvard. Dr. Kleinig lists 9 books, 9 edited books, and over 100 articles, book chapters, and other scholarly publications, including titles such as Torture and the Political Morality, Cultural Relativism and Human Rights, ticking bombs and torture warrants, and testimonial deception by police and ethical analysis. He also includes a list of popular publications, including contemplative essays, as well as poetry on his veto, which I'm thrilled to see. Dr. Kleinig has been the editor of the Journal of Criminal Justice Ethics since 1986, I told you, and his book, Paternalism, won the New York Institute of Criminal Justice Ethics Annual Book Award in 1984. He is by far one of the nation's leading, one of the world's leading experts in criminal justice ethics, and I am certain his presentation this morning will be something that Dr. Beto would have been interested in hearing himself. Please join me in welcoming today's distinguished lecturer, Dr. John Kleinig.
See if that works. Okay? Well, it's a little like attending one's execution, but still, thanks very much for coming along. I want to thank you for the honor of the invitation and for the opportunity to visit this distinguished college and Center of Criminal Justice. It's very nice to put names to, or to put faces to names that I've read in the literature in the time that I've been working in criminal justice ethics. I didn't start in criminal justice ethics. I met a girl, I changed universities, and I had to find a new field to work in. And so all John Jay had for me was work in criminal justice ethics. So from about 86 on, that's where I've been, and that's why I moved into this particular area. I used to work mostly in social philosophy and medical ethics prior to coming to the States. I want to take as my point of departure 5 quotes. They'll set the scene for this topic of loyalty and the police. The first may have been coined by the senior NYPD, New York Police Department officer, who told it to me. When an organization wants you to do right, he says, it asks for your integrity. When it wants you to do wrong, it demands your loyalty. The second quote is attributed to Lord Melbourne, who spent 2 periods as the English Prime Minister during the 19th century. When Melbourne was told by a member of a very fractious parliament that he could expect this member's support as long as he was in the right, Melbourne is reported to have replied to him, "What I want is men who will support me when I'm in the wrong." The third is a little like that, but it's closer to home. It comes from the one-time Louisiana governor, Earl Long, who sought a particular legislator's vote on a controversial tax bill. "I don't need you when I'm right. I need you when I'm wrong," he said. The fourth one comes from Bill McCarthy, a former colleague at John Jay, and prior to that, the commander of the NYPD bomb squad, who now teaches criminal justice at Corning Community College. In his NYPD memoir called Vice Cop, McCarthy writes, "Loyalty in the police department means you're willing to lie for someone else." The final quote, a somewhat longer one, and probably harks back to the BD that you were talking about, comes from a book from an English teacher of literature, Harry Blamires, in a book titled The Christian Mind. It's a somewhat longish quote, but the flavor will be very clear. Loyalty, he says, is itself not a moral basis for action. Loyalty to a good man, a good government, a good cause is, of course, a different thing. But in these cases where one stands by a man or a government or a cause because it is good, one is standing by the good. The basis for action in these cases is moral, in that one is serving the good, and thus the concept of loyalty is redundant. One can therefore say fairly that whenever the virtue of loyalty is quoted as the prime motive or basis for action, one has the strongest reasons for suspecting that support is being sought for a bad cause. There is no need to drag in the pseudo-virtue of loyalty if genuine values are being served in the course that is recommended. In this sense, it may be said that loyalty is a sham virtue, exploited to give a bogus moral flavour to amoral or immoral actions. We breathe the word loyalty, and immediately a sentimental warmth floods our minds. We get the emotional kick which properly accompanies decisions made in the interest of noble causes. Our complacency is cheaply earned. We have evaded the necessity to scrutinize policies with our best Christian judgment. We have acted in the way calculated to keep us in with the powers that be. We have followed the herd. We have done all this and at the same time acquired a cozy feeling in the stomach of virtuous achievement. Loyalty is a key concept in modern life, and it does enormous damage to our moral fibre. Well, these are not very promising advertisements for loyalty, nor are they for a lecture that wishes to defend loyalty as a virtue and as a virtue for police. But it is good that we first get a feeling for the perils associated with our topic before we seek to carve out something more positive. Those of you who have been associated with police work or other areas of criminal justice, or with the professions more generally, or for that matter with business organisations, will know that informally, at least, and often quite explicitly, loyalty is upheld as a central virtue, often as a virtue that is so important that it can trump other virtues such as competence or even integrity. A number of years ago, when Frank Macchiarola, a well-respected Chancellor of the New York City school system, was explaining his success as a public official, he stated, "I look for two things in my people, loyalty and competence, and in that order." Some would argue with justification, I think, that a similar spirit has pervaded the current White House administration, though competence has sometimes seemed to come a rather poor second. A bit closer to our topic, that bane of many police departments, the so-called blue wall of silence, is usually justified within the ranks as a matter of loyalty. The rat or snitch who reveals the misdeeds of another officer and is seen as the lowest of the lows is viewed first and foremost as a disloyal traitor to his or her fellows, no better than a prostitute who has traded something precious for personal gain. We can see then that the tension that loyalty creates. It is presented on the one hand as a critical associative value, a powerful bond, and on the other as a corrupter of important social ends. So then, how should we view it? Is it, as Dr. Johnson spoke of its political expression, the last refuge of rogues and scoundrels? Or should we, as the biblical book of Proverbs says, bind it around our neck and write it on the tablet of our heart? I will come back to the police in a little while, but it will be a little while. But first I want to spend some time talking about some of the philosophical and ethical dimensions of loyalty. Loyalty is a very old idea, although it's not one that philosophers have talked a great deal about. Nevertheless, for many centuries, indeed millennia, it has been the stuff of religion, politics, and drama. Think of the biblical stories in which Israel is metaphorically characterized as unfaithful to the divine lover who is unwavering in his loyalty. Think of the Greek tragedies of Aeschylus with their stories of conflicting loyalties and betrayal. Think of Shakespeare, so often concerned with issues of loyalty and disloyalty. We have plenty of dramatic material to work with. Loyalty is not a modern or even a marginal idea. So then, how should we construe the loyalty that figures so prominently in the long drama of human life? Let me extrapolate very quickly, as philosophers are prone to do, by suggesting to you, I hope this rings right to you, by suggesting to you that loyalty is characterized primarily by perseverance in an association or relationship to which a person or group has committed itself. Perseverance in an association or relationship to which a person or group has committed itself. It's characterized by perseverance because loyalty is ordinarily shown in the face of some temptation or self-serving pressure to abandon its object. This temptation or pressure may come from the advantage that would accrue from switching personal or organizational horses, a better job or a more attractive wife. It may be the threat to oneself should one refuse to provide information concerning the object of one's loyalty, the spy who refuses to betray his country. It may be the social scorn that would come from standing up for someone to whom one is closely connected, the close friend who's being reviled for having unpopular opinions. The loyal friend will be there for you even when it is convenient, at 2 a.m. in the morning. The loyal worker will put in extra and perhaps uncompensated hours so that the organization can fulfill the unexpected demands placed upon it. The loyal company will not discard its workers when to do so would improve its bottom line. Loyalty is more than a feeling or sentiment or even a profession of commitment. It is, as philosophers would say, a practical disposition to stay with or support some person or collective, even when, especially when, it is likely to be costly to remain or advantageous to leave. Although loyalty is a practical disposition, it's not usually a free-floating one. Most commonly, we connect loyalty with certain kinds of associations or relationships. We think of it especially in regard to friendship, families, professional or work groups, nations or countries, religious faith or communities. Not that it's restricted to these, but these are associational ties that often become very important to us. They become the objects of our loyalty. Our focus then is not generally on loyalty per se, but most commonly on what I call loyalties to friends, family, certain organizations, professional groups, tribe, nation, country, or God. In philosophical speak, we often say that where groupings have come to have intrinsic importance for us, or that we have come to identify with them so that they become ours, my friend, our company, my country, our profession, we become loyally bound to them. I do not develop loyalty to your friends unless they also become mine. Valuing an association or relationship for its own sake is a critical condition of loyalty. Even if we once valued the association or relationship simply for the ways in which it benefited us, once we have come to value it for its own sake, we also become loyally attached to it. If those we call our friends are valued only because of what they can do for us, then we are no real friend to them, only opportunistic ones. What I sometimes call Dale Carnegie friends, for those of you who are familiar with how to win friends and influence people. Genuine friendship, in fact, is the one relationship in which loyalty is an intrinsic feature. In other relationships and associations, loyalty is not built in quite the same way, even if it is thought highly desirable. We can, if we wish, see our families or country simply as resources and not as something with which we identify. And if we see them in this way, then they will not become objects of our loyalty, even if it is arguable that they should do. So then, whatever the terms on which we commence our association with others, whether it is our families, our friends, our ethnic group, our religious community, or our country, unless we come to see our association with those others as valuable for its own sake, we will not see that association as one to which our loyalty is owed, even if it is a failing on our part that we have no loyalty for it. One of the critical questions we need to ask, whether or not we have loyalty for some association or relationship, is whether the particular association or relationship is worthy of or is an appropriate object for our loyalty. The loyal Nazi or mafioso is not to be admired any more than is the conscientious or sincere Nazi or mafioso, even if loyalty in relationships is to be encouraged along with conscientiousness and sincerity. They are not to be admired because we should eschew the associations to which such loyalty is given. We can enter into bad associations and bad friendships. I'm going to come back to this in a little while. But first, I imagine that some of you will have noted and wondered about the way in which I have focused on loyalty as an associative disposition, as something connected to relationships, personal associations, affiliations, and so on. That is, to families, friends, groupings, communities, organizations, and other personalized collectivities, rather than to principles, values, causes, and other abstractions. That restriction on my part is not accidental, nor is it, I might say, uncontroversial. But it is an issue on which there has been a good deal of philosophical debate, and also one on which I've come out on one side rather than the other. So let me say just a little bit more about that. As I see it, originally and primarily, loyalty has been an associational or associative value, a key value, moreover, for humans who have found, and I think still rightly find, so much of their flourishing embedded in various relational and associational connections. Many of those relational and associational connections we value not just for what we can get out of them, but also for what they have come to mean for us. They have become part of what we are. Loyalty is a central value of this connectedness, one that keeps us bonded with others, even when it's not personally advantageous to us. It provides an antidote to a utilitarian or instrumental or merely cost-benefit approach to human relations, to our friends, families, institutional groupings, and so on. Historically, loyalty has been connected primarily with personal associations of some kind. As I said, by definition to friends, but also and importantly to family, spouse, God, tribe, or community. However, in the discourse of late medieval times, as notions of individuality and a sense of individual responsibility emerged from feudal values, the problematic character of associational loyalties, especially those to lords and kings, became increasingly manifest, as those to whom loyalty was said to be owed showed themselves to be unworthy of the allegiance or fealty they sought from and expected of others. This was the era of the Magna Carta. That emerging unease with a fixed order of loyalties then led, partly for political reasons, to a distinction being drawn between loyalty to the king and loyalty to the more abstract idea of kingship. As those who sought to distance themselves from the activities of a particular royal incumbent, nevertheless also sought to indicate that their complaint was not with the institution of kingship, but only with its present occupant. Though opposed to this king, they were not disloyal outlaws. They became, in other words, precursors of what was and is still spoken of as a loyal opposition. Though this abstractive strategy subsequently became reflected in talk of loyalty to principle, to law, to constitution, or to causes, it is, I think, though understandable, nevertheless a derogation from, and in some ways a distortion of, an idea of loyalty that is really rooted in our nature as associational or relational beings. Although talk of loyalty to abstract principles is not an altogether unreasonable extension of an underlying presumption, I think it has been a source of considerable confusion in debates about the objects and limits of loyalty. Even if I believe that loyalty is an associative virtue, I also think that the view I am opposing points to something quite important. Let me try to put it a bit more philosophically, though I hope not too obscurely, if I haven't been obscure enough already. When we identify with the object of our loyalty, whether it is our country or our friend, there is usually implicit in our loyalty a judgment that the object of our loyalty meshes with that for which we stand. That is, embedded in the associations to which our loyalty is given are certain, often unspoken presumptions about the compatibility of the basic values of the object of our loyalty with those to which we ourselves are committed. Note, however, that it's not the values themselves that ground our loyalty, for that might suggest that our loyalty is to the values. Our loyalty is to the object of our association that we've come to value for its own sake, albeit an object whose values we presume to be compatible with our own. To the extent then that we discover those presumptions to have been wrong, we find something out about our friend or what our country is doing, then we have a reason to reconsider the terms of our loyalty. That is, we have a reason either to work for some change in the object of our loyalty as a condition of our continuing the association that we've come to value for its own sake, or if the dissonance that we have found is too great or cannot be eliminated, then we will have reason to abandon the association as beyond repair. We will claim that the object of our association has forfeited its claims to our loyalty. We may, of course, do neither, and it's under those conditions that loyalty can become perverted. Our loyalty becomes blind or servile or corrupt. But that is a perversion of loyalty, not a characterization of its essence. In a nutshell, my point is that although loyalty may sometimes appear to rest on or reside in the embedded values of associational objects, our loyalties are first and foremost to the affiliational objects or persons and not to the particular values that they instantiate. Loyalty is fundamentally a relational virtue. Before I get back to the police, and I'm getting back fairly soon, let me say one or two more things in connection with this general account of loyalty. Our loyalties tend to be multiple and they may change. Although some loyalties last a lifetime, and in the case of many of our primary associations, they often do last that long, other loyalties may be overridden, abandoned, forfeited, or even betrayed. Most of us will acquire loyalties to friends, family, work organisations, sports teams, professional groups and country. And for the most part, these loyalties will work harmoniously together, but not always. Sometimes there will be conflicts between or among them. And if we do not already recognise priorities among them, then we're going to need to determine them. Family loyalty may clash with workplace loyalty. Religious loyalty may clash with friendship loyalty. Spousal loyalty may compete with alternative attractions. And a choice may have to be made to abandon one or give priority, or give one priority over another. There may as well be conflicts between a loyalty that we have and some principle or value that is important to us. That is often the dilemma of a whistleblower whose loyalty to an organisation can be tested by observations of fraud, waste, and corruption that are not addressed. Such choices, when they have to be made, can be psychologically and even morally extremely hard to make. On some occasions, a decision against the object of loyalty will lead to accusations of betrayal. However, whether a charge of betrayal or disloyalty is justified will depend very importantly on underlying motivations. When Robert E. Lee decided to go with kith and kin in Virginia rather than stay with the Union, his tragic decision was not treated as a betrayal, for it was understandable and honourable, even if regrettable and misguided. That is what distinguished him from Benedict Arnold, whose choices were seen as self-servingly motivated. In essence, what distinguishes a principled decision from one of disloyalty is that the disloyal person forsakes the object of loyalty for what are fundamentally self-interested or self-serving reasons. and thus violates the very raison d'etre of loyalty, namely resisting the blandishments of self-interest in our most important relations and associations. Those who are loyal are motivated by their concern to advance or protect the interests of the object of their loyalty, not by what they judge will be advantageous to their own well-being. Well, it's well and truly time to get back to policing. Although loyalty tends to be seen as an important grassroots characteristic and virtue in policing, it is not commonly found in codes of ethics that we associate with policing. If you look at most of the main codes of police ethics, such as those promulgated by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the IACP, you will see that they make no explicit mention of loyalty or even of its close relation, allegiance. There are some understandable reasons for this. One is that although most studies of the so-called working personality of police officers are likely to make reference to loyalty, or more generally to solidarity, police codes of ethics, which are best understood as compacts between police and the public they serve, tend to emphasize virtues that figure more directly in police-community relations. And so what the NYPD, for example, advertises on every car as courtesy, professionalism, and respect is likely to figure much more prominently in such communal pledges, maybe not communal actions, than loyalty, because loyalty, rightly or wrongly, often tends to be associated with the internal dynamics of policing than with police-community relations. Furthermore, as the NYPD logo illustrates, they tend to focus on sticking points in police-community relations, and it might be argued that lack of loyalty is not a problem from which the police suffer. Nevertheless, there are some exceptions, and I find them quite illuminating. If, for example, you go not so far away from here to the statement of values of the Garland Police Department in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you will see that it seeks to uphold in its statement of values integrity, professionalism, loyalty, courage, fairness/equality, leadership, and teamwork. It then explicates these values. When it comes to its reference to loyalty, it states, members shall recognize that their allegiance is first to the community and then to the department's mission and the government agency that employs them. Commitment to the department must be over and above that of any individual member of the department. It's not an unproblematic statement, but it is nevertheless an interesting one, in part because it recognizes that police do have loyalties, that they have plural loyalties, and that these may sometimes come into conflict. However, as you would expect in a code of ethics or statement of values, it links police loyalty primarily to the community and makes it clear that a police officer's loyalty to the community he or she serves should be given priority over the loyalty owed to either the police organization or to other officers. It does not deny that officers will develop loyalties to each other or even seek to delegitimate such loyalties. What is affirmed, however, is that some loyalties, in particular, the loyalty that police officers will develop to the partners they have and even to their superiors, should ordinarily be secondary to their loyalty to the wider community. And so, as with other clauses in a code of statement or a code of ethics or statement of values, it is oriented to police-community relations, and it focuses on a sticking point in those relations. Let me try to develop this a little bit more by talking about some of the loyalties that police might legitimately develop, some of the problems associated with those loyalties, and the limits to such loyalty. First of all, I think it is both natural and understandable that first-line or street officers will develop loyalties to each other. This will be especially true of partners, but is likely to develop more broadly to encompass other street cops and maybe also their immediate operational supervisors. It's natural and understandable because of the nature of police work. Policing is not a solitary activity, but a team one involving a considerable amount of interdependence and, at least in terms of police mythology, one associated with a great deal of uncertainty, unpredictability, and potential for danger. Street cops frequently work as though other cops are the only others on whom they can depend. And in some environments, that may well be correct. The initially utilitarian character of the bonds that develop between and among police officers tend to become intrinsic fairly quickly. That is, police come to identify with each other as police. Policing becomes not just a job, but a way of life and a mode of being. The bonds become bonds, as it were, of family, friendship, and brotherhood. Bonds that have intrinsic and not merely instrumental value. And it is important that they come to have this value, because only so can it be anticipated that the sacrifices that policing can require will be made. Were police to view their relations purely instrumentally, they would be much more reluctant to put themselves in harm's way. That is one reason why police funerals, especially of those who have died in the line of duty, tend to be such large and emotional demonstrations of solidarity. It is the expectation that police will put themselves in harm's way that also helps to fuel and justify the loyalty of police to their community. For police man that borderline between communal order and disorder, seeking to contain the forces of decay and predation. It's important for dedicated service to that communal role that they have loyalty to their community. But more than this, and as I shall suggest, of crucial significance, when the Garland Police Department Statement of Values gives priority to loyalty to community, it recognises, without stating it, an important feature of policing. Policing is not a natural association in the way in which friendship and familial relations tend to be. It does not have the status of a fundamental human associative relation, but is an artificial institution that we have set up within our communities so that certain important social functions can be accomplished. Chief among these has been the protection of our rights under law, though in a more comprehensive lecture I would argue that police have a wider social role that we might more adequately characterise as social peacekeeping. My point just here, though, is that policing is a community enterprise, and it is important to its success as a community enterprise that those who engage in police work do not view what they do merely instrumentally, but also develop a loyalty to the community they serve. It's important to the well-being of a community that those who police it are loyally committed to it, for then they will watch out for those things that threaten it, even though to do so may involve some measure of self-sacrifice. Let me explain this a little more fully by referring you to a classic of political economy, Albert Hirschman's Exit, Voice and Loyalty, Responses to Decline in Firms, Organizations and States, published back in 1970. Hirschman's underlying premise is that institutions, whether we're talking about friendships or marriages, or functional institutions such as political parties, or public institutions such as police departments, all have an endemic tendency to decline, what is sometimes known in the literature as institutional entropy, unless strategies are in place to reverse this tendency. Untended, these arrangements, friendships and marriages and other institutions included, these arrangements become stale or bloated, bureaucratic or directionless, and in many cases will be inclined to fall apart. It is Hirschman's contention that central to the ability of institutions to weather decline and to recuperate is that a significant number of those who serve in them or make use of them develop a loyalty toward them. For such loyalty gives them a commitment that extends beyond the bounds of their functional utility. If our loyalty is on track, we will put ourselves out for that to which we are loyally committed, pulling it back in line if it has wandered from its path or compromised its values. Your best friends are the friends who tell you you stuffed up, okay? Obviously, we could add to the dual loyalties that police may be expected to acquire. That's the loyalty to community and loyalty to each other. And you will have noticed that the Garland Police Department refers also, albeit I think a little more problematically, to loyalty to the department's mission and the government agency that employs them. But also many police officers will have other loyalties, loyalties to their families, to their country, their God, and so on. Such loyalties are the expected outcomes of associational life, particularly in cases in which the associations in question have importance for those who belong to them. But serious problems arise, however, when these various loyalties come into conflict with each other or with other important values that are held. A police officer's work loyalties may come into conflict with his or her family loyalties. Religious loyalties may come into conflict with loyalty to a supervisor. Professional loyalties may conflict with loyalty to a department. And loyalty to a partner may come into conflict with an officer's sense of justice or probity. I don't want to spend time talking about these various conflicts, although I'd be happy to do so in discussion. Instead, I want to focus on what I think is the most critical of these conflicts, the potential conflict between loyalty to one's partner or fellow officers and loyalty to the community one is called to serve. Most often, and sadly, the loyalty of police officers is associated with the blue wall of silence, the unwillingness of officers to do or say anything that would jeopardize what is seen as the well-being of another officer. This unwillingness may extend to lying to protect another officer against, say, charges of excessive force, corruption, or other misconduct. Part of the rationale for the blue wall of silence is the loyalty that officers are said to owe each other, though in actuality the blue wall is as impenetrable as it often is, because it is also sustained by coercion, shame, and notions of reciprocity. But leaving the latter aside, however, the argument often presented is that the risks inherent in policing, the interdependence of officers, and the bonds forged by the job make it critically important that an officer never does anything to place another officer at risk of sanction. As it was angrily and rhetorically put to me some years ago by an officer with whom I was discussing the issue of ticketing another officer, "Would you ticket your mother?" The assumption, of course, was that I wouldn't, or that if I would show myself to be an ungrateful or unworthy son. Although the blue wall by no means exhausts the ways in which officers may express loyalty to each other, it is nevertheless this particular expression of officer loyalty that most often conflicts with loyalty to the community, the commitment of officers to the community of which they are a part and to whose service they are called. Unfortunately, in the contests of loyalty that occur, it's often the community that loses out. There are some psychological reasons for this. Bonds to a partner or workmate are generally psychologically stronger than the bonds one has to a collectivity to which one feels less connection, even though overall the bond to the community should be considered more important than that to the police department. This privileging of fellow officers is often exacerbated by the familial and friendship metaphors that are often invoked in policing circles. But the psychological strength of a particular connection to others is not in itself determinative of the moral priorities involved. What we need to know is their moral strength. And here we must claim that even if those we speak of as family and friends may make strong claims on us, they cannot make absolute claims, and sometimes we are justified in overriding them. In the case of policing, communal claims ordinarily, though possibly not always, National Socialist Germany maybe not, okay, sometimes ordinarily override the claims of brotherhood, family, and friendship that are invoked. And this is for the simple reason that policing is not a natural institution such as family and friendship, but an artificial one designed to serve various communal interests. Those communal purposes place a firm moral limit on the justifiable loyalty that one may have to another officer. It is true, as I suggested earlier, that loyalty to a fellow officer ordinarily serves the communal purposes of policing, but it is not an unconstrained and unbounded loyalty. All of this, of course, is complicated, unfortunately, by the fact that the supposed mediators of communal claims, the disciplinary processes of a police department, may themselves be corrupted, and an officer who is aware of wrongdoing will find him or herself between a rock and a hard place. So there can be a different kind of tension that occurs there. And how ultimately we resolve some of these tensions will require a nuanced discussion of the particulars of individual cases. Well, it's time to draw this to a close. As you will remember, I began with a series of quotations that put loyalty in a very bad light. I've attempted to cast it in a rather better light, seeing in loyalty a virtue of critical importance in our relations with others. It is loyalty that keeps us from instrumentalism. It is loyalty that defines our various social identities and commitments. It is loyalty that keeps us keeping on when associative downturns occur and energizes us in seeking to repair matters. But as those early quotes remind us, loyalty can also be easily corrupted. And because it is an associative virtue, it can be extremely dangerous. It can be a terrible, terrible bond for collective oppression, whether we're dealing with vicious nationalisms or a corrupt police department. But the risks associated with it should not lead us to reject it. No virtue, when you come to think about it, is immune to excess and perversion. Justice without mercy, generosity to a fault, courage in an evil cause, sincerely held pernicious beliefs, all display the failure of a virtue properly constrained. The implicit message of a well-balanced theory of the virtues is that the virtues are not to be pursued in isolation, but kept in some kind of balance. Even though the Garland Police Department is mindful of some of the complexities and dangers of loyalty, it does not commit itself only to loyalty, but also to integrity, professionalism, courage, compassion, fairness, equality, leadership, and teamwork. These do not represent unbounded expectations, but a part of an integrated pledge in which loyalty will not undermine integrity, compassion will not subvert professionalism, courage will not undermine teamwork, leadership will not be exercised unfairly, and so on. In the company of other virtues, loyalty is a great virtue to have. Thank you.
We will now open the floor for questions. When you ask your question, if you can please do so loudly,
I'm deaf.
So that I can hear you. No. And please, questions, I'm sure Dr. Sorial has several, but he's going to hold on.
Two hands.
Is it fair to assume that the opposite...
Sam, you have to speak up.
Is it fair to assume that the opposite of loyalty is disloyalty?
The opposite of loyalty is disloyalty. I think loyalty has a number of opposites. Disloyalty is only one of the opposites. Because you can, if I do not uphold what another person wants as a matter of loyalty, my reasons for not upholding it may in fact indicate an overriding of loyalty in a particular case. But that doesn't mean disloyalty. This is a critical question, by the way, because what happens is that a cop in a police department who speaks truthfully and gets another police officer in trouble is often said to be disloyal. Okay, but not every violation of the expectations of loyalty constitutes disloyalty. The way I would normally say it is that the cop who has acted wrongly in these cases has forfeited his claims to loyalty by virtue of what he did. Or alternatively, if not forfeited his claims to loyalty by virtue of what he did, has had the claims of loyalty overridden by some other higher claim that should have taken precedence in those particular cases. But the way we operate so often is that if it's not loyalty, it's disloyalty. I tried to give you the example of Robert E. Lee because I thought it was a good case where you're going from one group to another wasn't seen as disloyalty because the group to which he went for honorable, even if misguided reasons. And people may make bad judgments, but not be accused of disloyalty because of the judgments they made. It may be a different kind of failing that they have. But I think that's a really important issue to not see loyalty and disloyalty as simple opposites.
In the example that you gave about the police officer who gives a ticket to the mother, then he's loyal to his department by giving a ticket to the mother. So what would you call that? Is he not being loyal to his mother? Is it disloyal, or what is it?
I wouldn't take the view, personally, that every time a police officer pulls over another police officer for speeding, that a ticket should be given. But what happens, of course, is that it's just treated as something between friends and not treated as something serious. It does mean something when you are bonded to somebody else in a bond of loyalty. If I caught my daughter shoplifting, then I could do one of two things. I could take her to the manager and say, I caught her shoplifting. You've got a sign up there saying shoplifters will be prosecuted. Call the police. That's one thing I could do. Another thing I could do is I could take my daughter home where she would hear about it and be taught a lesson that that is not the kind of thing you do, and not as my daughter. and in other words, you're taking it seriously, but you're also recognizing that the bond itself places some constraints on you. The problem so often with police loyalty is that when police catch other police doing things, they just turn a blind eye to it and they don't treat it seriously. I think very often police should informally sanction their fellow officers. Okay? I'm not sure that they should report it always to their superiors. I think that, and that was my point about the problematic character of the means of if you like, policing. Very often the structures of discipline within a police department themselves do not operate in a fair manner. But as long as it's not, you don't turn a blind eye or think that it's okay that you did it because you're a cop or something like that. You take it seriously. So it's not that I would necessarily give my mother a ticket, but I would surely rouse on her for having done so. Maybe I should give her a ticket. I mean, I'm not saying that should be ruled out either. I mean, it would depend very much on the case. Police do have a great deal of discretion, but the discretion doesn't automatically mean you don't ticket a fellow officer, but nor does it mean that you don't take it seriously.
Has there been any other empirical research on the dynamics of loyalty between officers and community officers and other officers or officers in the department?
I've done no empirical research, and I don't know much empirical research on that particular topic. All I talk to cops, so my empirical research is of a qualitative and not a quantitative nature. So they tell me stories about what has happened, and I have an article actually on professional courtesies that I wrote a number of years ago. It's no good going to the original version because they chopped off all the footnotes, which gave all the juicy examples. But I don't know about between different police officers. But the bonds are very strong, and they're certainly on a street level. They're very hard to break even now. Police, I mean, this is recognized, I think, in whistleblowing in police work, where cops can call in anonymously. They're given a number or something like that, and then if they get caught in the subsequent operation, then they can indicate that this is their number, and therefore, they should be exempted from whatever penalties may may be levied out. But I don't know of a great deal of. It's a very difficult area to do empirical research in, by the way. You need someone on the inside to do that kind of research, and even then there may be a certain reluctance to say too much. It's okay. You don't. Hi.
How are members of an organization socialized into loyalty? Are they loyal? Are they predetermined to be loyal before they enter the organization? Or are they socialized to be loyal?
I think it's part of the socialization. It's an enormously important part of the initial training of police officers, that if they fail in something, they're letting their group down. And it's something you learn very early too, that this is your best friend. You can trust, you can put your life in this person's hands. But I've seen it operating in New York when I've talked with officers there. And one of my students, actually a doctoral student who decided to go into policing, little chubby, and had a lot of trouble with the physical side of policing. And whenever, and she almost dropped out in the end, but she didn't. She's been promoted now. But what they would say to her is that it wasn't her failing. She was letting down her fellow officers because they might need her at some point to be able to run faster than she could. So it's very much about developing a team and others relying on you. And then, of course, so much of your other life becomes bound up with the people you're working with.
Whenever that process is occurring, is there any sort of interdepartmental pushback against officers developing too much loyalty to their partners?
I think officially there often is. Down on the ground, it works the other way. I remember once talking to a class of cadets, and we were talking about what you do when you were policing a demonstration and somebody spat at you. And the cadet indicated what he would do to the person. and there's a supervisor at the back. Keep your mouth shut. I mean, so, there's at that level, I think they gradually learn that you stick together. And but the department, of course, and for obvious reasons, the department is answerable to the community, and it has to say a different kind of thing. It was like the old problem. Remember, there was a story that there was no such thing as police discretion. The old Kenneth Coop Davis's stuff, there was no such thing as police discretion. And then they suddenly discovered it in the 1950s. Because departments officially had a no discretion policy. We enforce the law, we enforce all the laws, that's our business. And then, of course, they start talking to actual police officers and find that it's very different. So things that happen at one level are said differently at another level, I think. And it's the same, I think, with the socialization. Yes?
The policymaker, the final decision maker in the police agency, and the hiring the supervisors, and then oftentimes the city council members to maintain a code of silence by turning a deaf ear to the police misconduct and retaliating against the whistleblowers. Can this phenomena be explained by loyalty?
It's only partially explained by loyalty. I indicated very briefly in the paper that there were other factors that were involved. There's coercion, what will happen to you if you rat. There is shame. Who are you to spill the beans? Haven't you done things in your career that you wouldn't want to be made known? And then a sort of an idea of reciprocity, of we scratch each other's back. You owe it to me because I am there for you. So there's that. So loyalty is only one of the factors, but it's often put up as we'll call it the morally salient factor behind a code of silence. That it's a betrayal to talk.
So how can you explain the fundamental cause of maintaining the code of silence by the high-rank supervisor or policymakers in police agency? It's not a whole part of the loyalty, but how do you explain the high-rank officials maintaining the code?
Often exactly the same, I think. I've got a job. I don't want trouble, not on my watch. I'm here for 2 years. I want it quiet. What happens after I go, that's somebody else's business. And so I think, I think the code of silence operates right through. Everyone wants to present to the public or to a wider public a happy scene.
John, two quick questions. If the virtue of loyalty is that important, why isn't it written in rules and regulations?
Why is it written?
Isn't written in rules and regulations? And secondly, shouldn't loyalty be a two-way street, or is it a one-way street?
No. I think firstly, I think I tried to explain why I think it isn't written into rules and regulations, because it's too easily thought of as simply something that's internal. I mean, the problem in police departments isn't a lack of loyalty, it's too much loyalty to the wrong, sometimes for the wrong purposes or to the wrong people. So it's not that the Garland Police Department is the only department. I could name perhaps 15 or 20 departments that actually include loyalty, and most of them actually, again, divided up a little bit like the Garland department. In other words, they want to make it clear that they don't mean just loyalty to a fellow cop. As far as the mutuality of loyalty, I think, is usually a very important thing. Why should you expect my loyalty if I'm not going to be loyal to you? That's of course, it's a key issue in friendship, that there is a mutuality in friendship that shows itself in loyalty. But the other place where it's become quite a big issue is in organizations where companies want the loyalty of their workers, and in return the workers say, well, when there's a bit of a downturn, don't sack us. So how can you expect our loyalty when you then fire us if things are going downhill? So I think there is often a mutuality involved. It is, of course, possible for someone to be totally loyal to somebody else without that other person being loyal. I think it often becomes a kind of servility in those cases, but I don't think it's. I mean, if you're thinking of the ethics of loyalty, I think there should be a mutuality. Yeah.
First, if you'll elaborate a little bit on whether you think the issue of loyalty is more problematic among policing as opposed to courts, judges, correctional, probation officers. Is it more important at the police level than the rest of the agency, the criminal justice system?
Oh, okay.
And then secondly, is the issue of loyalty more of a problematic in some cultures than others? In the United States as opposed to Eastern Europe or wherever? Is it a international issue, or is it more salient some places than others?
A tough question. I think we notice it more in law enforcement than we do in, say, corrections or the judiciary or other parts of the criminal justice system, because that's the interface between the criminal justice system and the people. And so if things go wrong there, then, as it were, misguided loyalties become a real problem. But I think the problems exist elsewhere. There's a fair bit of literature on judicial loyalties, on loyalties in prosecutorial officers, and of course there is what do they call it? The grey wall of silence for corrections officers or something like that. But loyalty is it's a much wider problem. When I talk to police about loyalty, they say, well, what are you talking about us? Look at the lawyers, look at the cop, look at the doctors. So wherever people are being affected, then I think loyalty becomes a critical issue, and I think we notice it more in the policing case than in other cases, just because of where it is socially. As far as other countries are concerned, I think there are different cultures, but I think loyalties tend to be developed pretty much the same way, but they express themselves differently. When I'm in England and I talk to cops about ticketing other cops, no problem. In fact, while I was over there for a time, there were a couple of stories in the newspaper about the chief of police being pulled over by a cop because he was speeding. And he says, it's embarrassing, I shouldn't have done it, and I got what I deserved, and that was it. Here, it would be a major problem. That poor cop would be out to Coventry or out of a job or whatever happened. So I think loyalty is still developed there, but they express themselves in different ways. And one of my gripes about the non-ticketing of police officers has been, why do you have to express your loyalty in this way rather than in some other way? They don't necessarily do it that way in this country. But, cultures develop in different ways, and that's the way we do it. I missed, sorry.
An observation, I want to get your input on this. The problem with developing loyalty to the community, especially as the community gets larger, is it's not cohesive. There's so many disparate groups. So who do you show your loyalty to?
Right.
And it's easier then, especially if certain segments of the community want to criticize you in your work, it's easy then to close ranks and form loyalty to your fellow officers. I would think that's a large part of what's going on.
It's a very important question and an enormously difficult one, because I talk of the community, Well, I quote it. What's that? We've got 15 different communities in this one. We're divided in so many different kinds of ways, and talking of loyalty to the community is somehow looks a little fuzzy. In Australia, where I originally come from, the loyalty is thought of as to the law. And the odd thing about Australian police is that they are not strictly seen as employees of a police department. So if my supervisor says to me, arrest that man, and I say, no, I don't think he's done anything worth arresting for, in this country, if I did that, I'd be up for insubordination. I might be out of a job. In Australia, I'm answerable to the law, not my supervisor. So my discretion is exercised independently of the department. It's an oddity of the English and Australian systems. But then, of course, theoretically, your loyalty might be seen as to something else, although I didn't like the idea of loyalty to the law, your devotion to it, if you like. But it's a problem. And then, of course, tensions develop between particular parts of a broader community and the police for various historic reasons. And that makes it even more difficult, I think. So it's not just that you've got lots of different masters or mistresses to answer to. Some of them are wanting one thing and some are wanting quite different kinds of things. And it's a real problem, I think, that police departments have not properly confronted because societies have not properly confronted. You put your finger, I think, on a real issue.
John, how can you convince police officers that their loyalty to the Constitution is higher than their loyalty to the law?
Well, I don't say loyalty to the Constitution. I say perhaps their devotion or commitment to the Constitution is higher than their devotion to the... Well, it's under the Constitution that things like departments exist. This was my whole point about saying that police organizations, police departments are not natural institutions in the ways in which families and friends are natural institutions. They have been, as it were, instituted for specific kinds of purposes, and those purposes, in some sense, draw the boundaries of whatever loyalties that occur within them. So that I have to, if my daughter applies for a job in the department in which I am also serving, then whatever loyalty I owe to my daughter has to be subsumed under my loyalty to the institution that I'm a part of. In other words, it's not, even though in other cases my loyalty to her may take precedence over my loyalty to the department, when she's applying for a job there, it's the departments that constitutes the constraints on my loyalty. I mean, what I should do in those cases is recuse myself and let others make the decision. But if I was to be part of it, I would have to say, look, whatever I owe her as my daughter is not relevant in this particular case. It's what I owe this person by virtue of academic and other kinds of qualities.
Let me interrupt now. In loyalty to the clock, some classes are changing right now. Some students need to be loyal to their next class. Doctoral students in the Bates room at 11 o'clock, that's about 5 minutes from now. We will pick this discussion back up, and you all are also invited to join us for lunch at noon in the concourse. But 11 o'clock in the Bates room. Thank you very much.
Thanks for loyally.